years, and it has done quite well. It has gathered up quite a few dollars in it. To use $62 million of that, as it stands now with where the budget is, to be provided to local school districts for capital maintenance needs. I want to be very clear that the Senate and the House agreed to mandatory language to make sure that we preserve our lottery funds. And we make sure that before any money goes into a facilities fund, that we are shoring up our lottery fund, and this legislation does that, and will continue to do that in the future. The second thing that the bill does, Mr. Speaker, is provide for a one-time $2,000 bonus to all of our classroom teachers. Members here know we've made teacher compensation a top priority in Tennessee in recent years. We've appropriated hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars to try to raise teacher salaries in the state of Tennessee. This is a continuation of that effort. Now, we're going to convene regular session here a week from Monday, and we'll have conversations about TISA funding for the coming school year and perhaps even teacher raises. But this is a one-time $2,000 bonus that would go to our teachers. This is a continuation of the effort that we've made in recent years to properly and adequately compensate our teachers. It's about 86,000 teachers that would be eligible for this $2,000 bonus. In the amendatory language, Mr. Speaker, we did put a provision in there at the request of the House that if a member of the legislature is employed by a K-12 school, then they're ineligible to receive the one-time bonus. The third and final thing that this legislation does, Mr. Speaker, is create the Education Freedom Scholarship Program. This is a program that will empower parents to pick educational alternatives that they think are appropriate for their child. We've all worked very hard in this body and in this General Assembly to create a public education system that we can be proud of. But as hard as we've worked in doing that, we need to recognize that it's not meeting the needs of all of our kids. This Education Freedom Act will create a scholarship program that will empower the parents of up to 20,000 kids to pick something that is more appropriate for the learning needs of their child. 10,000 of those scholarships will be prioritized for low and middle income families. The other 10,000 will be universal, and after the first year, they will all be universal. There is a growth mechanism in the program, Mr. Speaker, to provide for growth of the program once it reaches 75% capacity. It can grow, subject to appropriation by the legislature, at an additional 5,000 scholarships per year. But I emphasize that is only upon the approval and appropriation of necessary funding by future General Assemblies. These scholarships will be an amount equal to the TISA allocation per pupil, the statewide average. The approximate number that will be right now is $7,296. This bill expressly provides that private schools will maintain their autonomy over admissions, curriculum operations, and will ensure that their independence is preserved. As I said earlier, we addressed this with one of the amendments. These schools, the Category 1, 2, and 3 schools that will be eligible to receive these scholarships, already administer either the TCAP or a nationally recognized norm reference test. Final thing I'll mention about the scholarship program, Mr. Speaker, is the funding floor. One of the biggest concerns we've heard from our local districts is that this is somehow going to take money out of public education. The provision of the funding floor makes sure that that won't happen. Every school will be assured that they will receive no less money than they received in the prior academic year, even if they have a loss of student population through disenrollment. In closing, Mr. Speaker, and I'll certainly open it up for questions and debate, again, children have unique learning needs, and we should empower parents who believe that the school system they are zoned for is not meeting the needs, the educational needs of their child. They should have a different option. This isn't going to satisfy that need for everyone in Tennessee, but it's a really, really good start. 20,000 kids will benefit from this program. We will all continue to work as hard as we can to make our public school system the very, very best that it can be. But we can also do that. We can do that while also making sure parents are empowered to do what's right for their child. I'll yield for questions and discussion, Mr. Speaker. Thank you.
Discussion. You ready for the question? Leader Ackberry, do you have any questions, discussion? Senator Taylor.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker. You know, Mr. Speaker, Since I've been in the Senate, and by the way, I'm now a sophomore, so I'm glad that we have the arrival of the freshmen. But as I have told them, that sometimes the Senate can be a strange place, Mr. Speaker. It's a place where we get up and we speak, and some believe we say nothing, while some people will say no one listens, but yet we all disagree. And this debate we're about to engage on this is probably an example of that. I think everybody's minds are pretty much made up. But I wanted to just share where I am on this issue and how I arrived at where I stand on school choice. You know, I supported the bill last year when it was in the regular session, but unfortunately it stayed together about like Elizabeth Taylor's first marriage. It fell apart near the end of the session, and it happens every year that I've been up here. The end of session gets to be like a roll of toilet paper. The closer you get to the end, the faster it goes. And they just were unable to get that bill done last year. So I'm glad we're back this year in special session so that we can take up school choice. When my children were school-aged kids, Mr. Speaker, I was on the Memphis City Council, and so I obviously had to live in the city of Memphis. And at the time, we had the city of Memphis school system, which went out of business. It merged with the Shelby County school system a number of years ago. But I didn't want my kids to go to the city of Memphis school system. And so my wife and I decided we would send our kids to private school. And we paid the tuition for that. And I believe my kids are different kids today, Mr. Speaker, because of that choice that my wife and I had. They had different peer groups. They had different teachers. They were taught a different worldview. They were given different college opportunities as a result of that. And I'm pleased to announce today that my kids turned out okay. I've got one who's an attorney and one who's an architect. And what I want through school choice, Mr. Speaker, is I want every family in Tennessee to have the choice that I had because of my affluence to be able to make that same type of decision for their children. Much has been talked about low-income folks, and I agree. I want the mom in the inner city who is working 2 jobs, raising 2 or 3 kids, and because of where she can happen to afford to live, she is zoned into a school that may not be suitable for her children. And I want her to have the choice that I had, to be able to make school choice, to be able to have her kids take advantage of this scholarship and send her kids to a school where her kids will have different peer groups, her kids will have different teachers, her kids will have be taught a different worldview, and her kids will be given better college opportunities upon graduation. And Mr. Speaker, I believe that's how we break the generational poverty that exists in many of our communities in Tennessee, and particularly in my home county of Shelby. But it's not just low-income folks that benefit from this. It's the middle-class people who are living in the suburbs. And their husband and wife, they're working 2 jobs, and they can't afford private school. But where I was able to do so with my affluence, I want them to be able to have that same opportunity with this scholarship for their kids. Let me also say, Mr. Speaker, if you ever needed an example, a real-world example of why we need to give parents the opportunity to take advantage of these education scholarships, to send their kids to a school that they think is better than what is offered locally, you should look no further than the Memphis Shelby County School District. About 2 years ago, they fired the superintendent, maybe rightfully so, but they went 18 months, Mr. Speaker, without a superintendent. Then they hire a superintendent. 9 months in, the school board fires Dr. Fagans after 9 months on the job. Now they're back to having an interim superintendent, and the community has been outraged by that. And that is an example of what we can cure, because if Shelby County School District had competition, they would do a better job of hiring superintendents, and they would focus more on educating the kids than they are on the raw politics and the power play that's played out between the school board and the superintendent. And as a result, they've been about as successful as an Amish electrician down there in Memphis when it comes to educating the kids. Now, some will believe, Mr. Speaker, that this is not a perfect bill. And in some ways, I agree with them. But we can't let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And we have to, we're trying to improve education for kids throughout the state. And we can't do that overnight with one bill. We'll have to continue to work on this bill. And we'll have to make those improvements step by step. You can't come right out of the gate with a perfect bill. That's why you can't take a laxative and a sleeping pill on the same night. You got to spread that out, and you got to make progress step by step. Mr. Speaker, I'll end with this. A few days ago, a group of us traveled up to Frank Nicely's daughter's visitation, Rachel Nicely. And there were a ton of people at the funeral home, Mr. Speaker. The line snaked all the way through the building, out the building into the parking lot, around the corner, and a lot of people were there. And I'll just say as a side, Mr. Speaker, a lady came in the door with a plate full of food. She made a beeline right to me, right past my colleagues and others there, and she said, "Excuse me, do you know where I can put this food?" I said, "No, ma'am, I'm not the funeral director, but I can find the funeral director for you." Out of 500 people there, she walked right up to me, Mr. Speaker, and as if I were the funeral director. I must have that funeral director look about me. But after we came back from that visitation, a group of us went to Jonathan's to eat. And as I looked at the menu, they've got pizza on the menu. It's pretty good pizza. They had 16 different choices of pizza on the menu. And Mr. Speaker, if we're given 16 choices of pizza at a restaurant, surely, Mr. Speaker, surely we can give parents a choice when it comes to something as important as educating their children. So, Mr. Speaker, I rise in support of this bill. I encourage my colleagues to support this bill so that we can empower parents to do what I was able to do, because I've been very fortunate to be able to make a choice about their children's education. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Taylor. I have Senator Wally, Senator Hackberry, Senator Crow. Senator Wally.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I know we just heard about Senator Nicely a moment ago, and it's humbling to me to be standing holding the microphone that he held for decades here. Left us with so many wonderful memories, and we still lift up his family in our prayer. Mr. Speaker, I rise today not to debate the bill, but to explain to my colleagues and our folks back in my district why I'm going to be voting against it. Mr. Speaker, like you and my colleagues, I cherish the words of Thomas Jefferson, which he, by the way, took from John Locke, who had written years before, and it's enshrined in our Declaration of Independence, that we as legislators, as the government of Tennessee, derive our power from the consent of the governed. Mr. Speaker, the vast majority of the citizens of my very rural district, District 26, do not consent to this proposal. I applaud those that have brought it. I think that there's positive elements in it. But, Mr. Speaker, as you've counseled me and others have before, it's my responsibility to listen to my district and, with their consent, vote on such momentous piece of legislation. Mr. Speaker, it would have been my fondest preference if we'd waited as our legislatively mandated evaluation of the current education savings account pilot project underway in Shelby, Davidson, and Hamilton County, if we'd received that. Our legislature very wisely, Mr. Speaker, charged our comptroller's office, the Office of Research and Education Accountability, with evaluating that pilot project, with the first evaluation due January of 2026. About a year from now, we were going to see what this legislature had created. Mr. Speaker, we even outlined some of the measures that we needed to see in order to decide whether to continue, to modify, to expand, or to discontinue this pilot project. Chief among them was academic performance indicators. How well are the children doing academically? And to be honest, Mr. Speaker, I think all of us can agree we just don't know yet with that pilot project. That's why we charged our comptroller with getting us those results, to see what the data say. If we waited for that data from the comptroller, Mr. Speaker, I believe we could really make a more prudent decision about proceeding with this public funding for private education conversation. But given that this proposal seeks to proceed now, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the majority of citizens in District 26, I respectfully cannot consent to support it. I hope that I'm proven wrong. I hope that it is an extraordinary success. But, Mr. Speaker, standing for the people of District 26, I respectfully will have to be voting no.
Thank you, Senator Wally. Leader Ackberry.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And my thoughts on this legislation and similar legislation have been well documented. I said in the Education Committee, this is my 12th session, and I have researched this probably more than any other issue. What I didn't share is that my second or third year in the legislature, I was sitting in my seat. I sat on the back row in the House, on the aisle, on the left side, aptly so. And I had a representative come up to me, and he was very kind. He's since retired. He said, "You need to vote for this bill. This is going to help your people more than anyone." And I sat there, and I thought about all the pressure I'd received from several education groups and how I had an election coming up. And I had a moment, and that moment has guided me the entire time I've been in this General Assembly, is that I didn't get elected to this seat to hold it. I got elected to this seat to represent the people that put me here. And so if I'm not able to keep that seat because of the votes I take for those people, then so be it. Because I was somebody before I got here, and I will be somebody after. And voting that way and voting my conscience of my district has kept me here, like I said, for my 12th session. So I urge my colleagues, it doesn't matter what other people say. The only folks that matter are the ones that can vote for you, the ones that put their faith and their confidence in you, that took a leap and said, this person might be good for this because they're going to speak for me when I don't have a seat at the table. There are districts across this state that do not have access to any public schools. Any private schools, I'm sorry. This legislation will allow for online private schools to be able to offer to your students in your district, so you think it might not impact you, so that they can attend, which will take students out of your public school system. This is a school choice bill, but Tennessee has had school choice for quite some time. I am from Memphis. We have 80 charter schools, some really great ones in my district, like Crosstown High or Maxine Smith STEAM Academy, which is a public school, but I'm sorry, they're both public schools. It's not a charter school. But we have Grizzlies Prep. We have Soulsville, which has 100% graduation rate, 100% college attendance rate. This is a charter school. It is a choice that parents can say, hey, the traditional public school that I'm zoned to is not working. I can take my child to this public school. So we have school choice already. I am a product of public schools. I saw somebody on Instagram said, well, her parents could afford to send her to private school. I didn't go to private school. I went to, and because of the unique nature of the city that I'm from, where we had 2 school districts, I went to Shelby County Schools, then Memphis City Schools for a period of time, and graduated from Shelby County Schools. And because of the public school education that I received, I was able to attend a top 10 university. I was able to go to law school and pass the bar on the first try. I believe while there has been some discord within the Memphis-Shelby County School Board, they are still a level 5 school. They have growth at a level that is at the top level, level 5. So I'm deeply offended when people use Shelby County Schools, Memphis-Shelby County Schools, as an example of why people need other options. The last thing I'll say is we talk about numbers here. I know you all know the expression, men lie, women lie, but numbers don't lie. In the pilot program that has been in Memphis, Nashville, Hamilton County, those students have not done better than their peers in traditional public schools. It's around 20 percentage points less. The NAEP scores just came out 2 days ago. One day, I can't tell. This week has been so crazy. I don't know day from day. But in Florida, where they spend $3 billion plus on educational vouchers every year, those students scored the lowest than they have in 20 years. We pride ourselves on being a fiscally responsible state, a fiscally conservative state, and yet we are taking a significant plunge with no proof that these vouchers will be successful. I want them to be. It's just like being on, I don't want to use that example because it's in poor taste, but it's like we're all in this ship together, okay? We're all in this ship together. We want us all to float. But if we are starting out with something that hasn't had the time yet to see if it will work in Tennessee, because we know it hasn't worked well in other states, like Arizona, like Ohio, like Louisiana, like Florida. So we did a pilot program. We want to see if it's going to work in Tennessee. And for us not to even fully bake out those results and then expand statewide, and for it not just to affect underprivileged children, because that's the argument, well, we want to give those who don't have enough to do for themselves, we want to give them a hand up. Not a handout, a hand up. But half of these voucher scholarships will go to folks regardless of their income. Whether you are literally a billionaire, millionaire, or you just are trying to make it, you will be able to take advantage of this scholarship. And again, these are public dollars. So if we do anything else, our only constitutional duty is to pass a budget, and it is to make sure that we are good stewards of the dollars that people pay into this system. Those are my comments. I know folks are going to vote how they vote, but I'll just leave you with that last point. One, we want to vote for something that has a track record of success. If we already have a pilot, why not see it through? And two, vote your district. It does not matter who donates to your campaign. It does not matter who threatens to primary you, because you're here for a reason. You're not here to hold a seat. You're here to represent the people who put you there. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Leader Ackberry. Senator Crow.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Like Senator Taylor, I think it's important for this body and my constituents to understand my reasoning. Like Senator Taylor, I've decided to vote for this bill. And Mr. Speaker, as you know, I have struggled with this. I met with you the first of the week and told you I couldn't vote for it. You remember? I've gone back and forth and back and forth. I spent the last couple nights in deep thought and prayer. I've struggled, I guess, with this issue more than any, I think, in my 36 years on this Senate floor. My mayors have all voiced support for this. All 7 mayors in Northeast Tennessee. All my school boards have voiced opposition, strong opposition. All for reasons that I respect. Like Senator Ackberry, I too want to represent my district's feelings. I've always understood we are a representative form of government. In my district, I remember it was the last year we had the Republican women here, this last year, a year before. The tables, remember how large those tables were? They were full. Half the table wanted it and half the table didn't. That's like my district. It's pretty much a 50-50 proposition. And so I've spent the last week or so trying to figure out deep in thought what to do here. So I put some thoughts down last night. And I can't think of issues that have brought more passion
and heartfelt opinions, I don't think, than the question before us today. I know whatever we do will please some that we represent and truly disappoint others. I know they all truly care for our children, and I've tried to listen to them all. Our focus, I think, needs to be on the kids and what's best for them. So the question at hand seems to be, do we vote to give parents the option of choice? That seems to be the question, but is this the wrong question? I thought to myself last night, is this the wrong question? If we believe this, then we believe that assumes that this right is ours as government to give. Is this right ours to government to give? I know that most of us in this chamber believe our rights don't come from government, they come from God. And if we believe that, then we have to assume that our role is to decide where and when government gets between a parent and their decisions about their children. We've made it clear that there are situations in government that government should get between parents and their child, such as when parents are abusing their children and other situations like that. But in this case, we are being asked whether government has a role in getting between a parent and their child when it comes to the question of where that child should be educated. Mr. Speaker, I've come to the conclusion that it is simply not the role of government to impede the parents' right to make these choices for their children. Today, the government tells parents their children should be educated in public schools. If the parents have the resources, they can decide to opt out. If they don't have the resources, then government would have made that decision for them. And their children will go to public schools and essentially have no other option except possibly homeschooling. So, Mr. Speaker, if we believe in choice, then this really means some do and some don't. So I have come to the conclusion that parents should have the right to choose for their children, and that government has a very high bar to jump over if it wants to inhibit that right. So now, Mr. Speaker, setting aside that fundamental belief that ultimately the parent has that right not from government but from God, I also believe that this bill does take important steps to protect our public schools. And so I applaud the governor and the sponsor of this bill, Senator Johnson, for realizing the very legitimate concern of our school boards that they have about sustainability of funding for our public schools. I can't think of any other service where government is willing to ensure, as this bill does, that funding stays in place despite whether the people using the service choose to seek it somewhere else. So thankfully, this bill provides for that stability. And I know the quality of schools in my district, and I know because of that quality, I believe that parents will continue to take advantage of the investment we have made in those schools and will continue to make in our public schools for the really good teachers that we have up in my district and in many places in this state. So, Mr. Speaker, I don't see the recognition of parents' rights as a threat. I really struggled, as you know, with this decision, mainly because I trust my school board members and others who oppose this bill. I trusted them to run this system. But sometimes we have to make a decision, especially when we know our districts are split the way many are. But my struggle ended when I asked myself that fundamental question: is the government's role to give rights to parents, or is the government's only possible role here to inhibit the parents' rights to make decisions on their children? And Mr. Speaker, this is not a perfect bill. This bill, parents have not lost that right with this bill. So I remain committed to supporting every possible effort to see that our children are provided with that high-quality K-12 education that ensures ensures that they can graduate high school or career ready. And so, Mr. Speaker, thank you for allowing me this time to speak. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Senator Crow. I have Senator Massey, Senator Oliver, Senator Yeager, Senator Lowe, and Senator Campbell. And Senator Roberts, Senator Yarborough. Senator Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Will the sponsor yield?
Sponsor yields.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I did want a clarification on the bonuses for our educators. Oftentimes when we give raises through our budget process, through the governor's recommendations, our special school educators are left out because they're under a different formula. These are our teachers that are at our Tennessee School for the Deaf. That's one we have. I know one in my district, one in Ed's district, and I know we have one in Davidson County. And I would like to. I'm just asking to confirm whether our great educators at our schools for the deaf are going to get the bonus also.
Leader Johnson to respond.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you, Senator Massey. And the answer is yes. So in the definition of classroom teacher in this legislation, it's consistent with that term and other places in the code. So the $86,000, $2,000 bonuses that will be distributed will include those teachers. Thank you for clarifying that.
Senator Massey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I just want to try to be brief because I know we've got a lot of other folks that are wanting to speak. In the past, I have not supported. I really haven't been opposed, but I haven't supported the scholarship legislation that we have had before us. And my main thing had been that our first responsibility was to increase our funding to public education. And in the past number of years, I think it's been about 5 years, we've been doing a significant effort. You know, I know we've increased it by over $2 billion, and I know the will of the body is to continue those increases annually as best we can, and I'm going to continue to support those. You know, I come from a line of public educators, and this is something that I really have always supported, and I will continue to support and make sure that we do everything we can, whether it's regulatory or whether it's financially for our public schools. In fact, I've got a couple of pieces of legislation this year I hope everybody will support in those efforts. But I have, you know, as Chairman Crow said, there's no such thing as a perfect bill. And we have to look not only at the bill, but listen to our constituents. And through being throughout my district, I go to countless numbers of events. I have talked to countless people about this. I have polled. I have received all the emails that I'm sure everybody else is receiving. And I have listened and read them and listened to my constituents. And it, like I say, it's people are very passionate on both sides. But we really do. I have a significant number, and really through, you know, my best efforts of polling, and we did a significant poll this summer. Besides my, you know, talking to folks, I have the majority of my constituents are supporting it. But I still have my concerns about the bill, so I have asked a lot of questions. I have looked down. I wanted to make sure our public school systems were still protected. I didn't quite understand the floor amount, and I have asked questions about that to make sure that our folks are going to be supported. And I want to make sure that this doesn't, as some people have alluded, that it's just going to grow out of proportions. And they cite Arizona. Well, thankfully, we're not Arizona. We do a good job through Chairman Watson and our leadership to make sure we're physically responsible here. And because I've got other priorities that I would like to get funded, like a few roads in our states and, obviously mental health. So I'm going to continue to advocate that this does not grow out of proportion, that we only fund what we can support while still supporting the other initiatives and priorities of the members. So I have gotten all my questions answered, and I do plan on voting for the bill, but I still am going to be watching it and making sure that it's going to do what it says it's done while still protecting our public system, which I think is vital to the background and the backbones of all our communities. And I give my word that I will continue to do that. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Massey. Senator Oliver.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I would like to speak directly to rural parents and educators and voters and taxpayers that might be watching us right now, listening to their representative. Unfortunately, your representative has reneged on a promise. Back in 2019, this body legislated about the ESA, the Education Student Accounts for Davidson and Shelby County. And that vote was so close, the House held the vote open to convince and strong-arm members to vote for it. And they promised that this voucher program would never come to your rural county. And then we added Hamilton County a couple of years ago to the pilot program. And now here we are 4 years later, reneging on that promise. And now we're coming to your districts with this program that you did not ask for, that you're begging us not to pass. It was only a matter of time before we would come for your kids. Billionaires who don't live in this state pressuring us to pass this legislation, threatening, writing op-eds, threatening members if they don't pass this. Re-election is on the chopping block. We don't answer to billionaires. We answer to our districts. How is this fair to rural counties who are, in my opinion, after I have studied this bill, will be harmed the most? I went on a local radio show and I was asked, give me the pros and cons of this bill. And I can't think of one pro. I can't think of one benefit where this legislation is a good idea. And I might sound like a Republican right now. Because I can't even think of one business case. There's not a business case for this legislation. Even the Tennessee Business Roundtable has written us to say, don't do this. It's not a good idea. Public schools educate the majority of our kids who will then become our workforce. Even in rural districts, in a lot of rural districts, the school district is the majority employer. So what happens when these kids start leaving their public school for a private school? The classrooms are going to shrink. So that teacher might not have a job. Is she going to go work at Dollar General? What are we doing to our rural public school districts with this bill? Even if I was a CEO of a company and I presented this voucher program to my shareholders, I would have data to say the pilot is failing. We don't have the data to prove that it's better. And now we're going to expand into other markets? They're going to laugh at us. They're going to laugh at me if I present this as a CEO to shareholders. So there's not a business case for this. Secondly, there is no fiscally conservative case for this legislation. The fiscal note on this will bankrupt our budget, our state budget. We're thinking about the short-term gains, but the long-term gains, look at Indiana. Copy and paste legislation of what we're passing here. They are now putting up $1 billion to spend on 10% of their student population. $1 billion. Because what we know is they started with a pilot program, and then they blew it up and opened it to everybody. No cap. So down the road, is that what we're going to do, is open it up to everyone? And then the admin cost in our own fiscal note shows that this is not fiscally conservative. We're going to grow our admin costs from $2 million to possibly $4 to $5 million every year. And then third, there is no small government case for this legislation. Since when do we make laws for the 2%? We're supposed to constitutionally bound to provide a public good in education to all Tennesseans. And we're only going to make a program for 20,000 students? Since when do we expand entitlement programs for the wealthy few? Because even in the fiscal note, it showed that 65% of the people that will take advantage of this program will be kids already in private schools or who already make and are affluent. And then third, there is no policy case for this legislation. When 51 out of 95 of our counties do not have a private school or small or a few at all. So these rural parents that you're representing will be sending their tax dollars to districts like mine in Williamson County so that their affluent parents can pay and take their kids to private school and subsidize their already private education. So who does this program really benefit? I can't think of any. Now, I want to say I don't have a problem with any family that wants to send their child to a private school. I don't have anything against private schools. I don't. But I do have a problem because we are creating scarcity in the market. We're creating an environment of scarcity with only 20,000 slots for people in public schools, which is leaving empty promises, not only for our rural parents that don't have a private school to send their kid to, but also the urban parents who won't even be guaranteed that their child will get into a private school because they already full. And let me just say personally, I have heard in other public forums the sponsor defend this bill by using a mythical single mother from Memphis working 3 jobs who's going to benefit from this bill, from a school voucher scholarship. And I'm deeply offended that we would use a single mother. You don't know the plight of a single mother. I do. I was raised by a single mother. I am one of those 3 children that was raised by a single mom. I know that life. I know what it's like to struggle. I know what it's like to live off of food stamps. And I know what it's like to watch my mother go to work in the public schools and then go to school at night to get her special education degree. She graduated the same week I graduated high school. I'm a product of public schools. I went to all 3 of my zone high schools, elementary, junior high, and high school. I had to struggle because I was raised in Little Rock public schools during Banging in Little Rock. If you know anything about Little Rock, then you know Banging in Little Rock HBO documentary, where I had to go to school with gang members. I watched people die by drive-by shootings. I survived that. I wanted to be in a gang, but I overcame that. Graduated number 3 in my high school, my public high school. This public school student went on to graduate from Vanderbilt University, top 20 university in the country, and then went on to get my master's degree in public administration from University of Tennessee. And this public school student became a state senator. Don't tell me that public schools are not better than private schools, because we can produce excellence if we invest in it. We can. But we got to have a political will in this body to do it. And what hurts is that we know in private conversations, we know this bill is not good. And you're going to vote for it anyway. Where is the courage to stand up for your district and your conscience? Where is that courage for our kids? Not for re-election, but for our kids. So, Mr. Speaker, I'm not asking our members to vote. I'm asking them to do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Oliver. Chairman Yeager.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just have a few words to say today in support of the bill that will provide freedom scholarships to boys and girls, young men and women across the state. But first, I want to answer a comment that was made by my colleague from Davidson County. I just want to say, Speaker, I know all about single moms. My daddy died when I was 4 years old. My mom worked her fingers to the bones to keep me and my 3 sisters together. It was a tough life. We lived in a 4-room frame house that in a windy spell, the wind would blow through the house. So don't tell me about poverty. I was there. But the one thing my mother did, she kept us together, and she encouraged me daily to get the best possible education I could. She never had that education because she had to drop out of school in the 6th grade during the Depression so she could feed her brothers and sisters. And if she were here with me today, I know that she would strongly support the right of parents to control the education of their children. And that is why I strongly support this bill. I might say, too, Mr. Speaker, that maybe you don't know, I'm a former classroom teacher. I taught in the public schools of Tennessee. I taught for 5 years. My first stint in public service was as a public school teacher. Junior high school. I tell people today, I taught 7th grade, and if you can do that, you can do anything. But I stay in touch with my students even to this day. It was such a great experience for me. And when I taught in the public schools, Mr. Speaker, I saw firsthand the importance of the role of parental involvement and parental choice in the life of their children. I could see that in the children that I taught, those parents that were involved in their children's education. So I strongly support the bill because the education freedom scholarships will encourage parental involvement and will improve academic performance and the self-esteem for those people, those young people. You know, there are good public schools in Tennessee, Mr. Speaker, and I'm very proud of the schools in my district. We have good schools. I spoke to all of my school directors this morning. But we have 147 school districts in this state, and not all students have the same access to quality education. And House Bill 6004 fixes that problem by authorizing a universal school choice. Some of you may know, historically, I've not supported this concept. I voted against the bill in past years. I voted against the bill, Mr. Speaker, because I was concerned about the bill, then the effect on the revenue of the school district. Governor Lee recognizes that issue, and he's fixed the problem. When enacted, this bill will hold schools harmless. For example, there are several I could use, but for example, if a student takes a scholarship and then disenrolls from public school, the state contribution will stay the same with the local school system. No school will lose funding because of the implementation of the Education Freedom Scholarship. This bill, this scholarship, this proposal celebrates the independence of the individual. It celebrates the ability of the individual to make his own decision. It celebrates the right of a parent to have control and a voice in their children's education. This bill, Mr. Speaker, is on the right side of history. I want to be on the right side of history. I'm voting yes, and I encourage my colleagues to join me as we vote yes to give parents greater input in the education of their children. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Yeager. I have Senator Lowe.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in support of the bill, and I have watched for almost a year while the opposition to this legislation has thrown anything against the wall to see what sticks, even down to conversations where folks who don't agree with conservatism want to argue conservative points. It's like hearing an agnostic try to preach to you about the Bible. Is there truly an understanding there? Anybody can follow me in my writings and even academic works back to mid-2000s and see that I've been a supporter of school choice. I ran as a school choice candidate. I'm probably one of the few on the floor that's never wavered. But I'm going to tell you that my advocacy for school choice began around about 1988 when I was a 7-year-old child held captive in a public school from a low-income family. A father that never finished school and held captive and accosted, physically accosted, where parents met with educators. And that's when I realized, and that was my first experience of being lectured by affluent people, how much I should love my captivity, how appreciative I should be of what I had to be. The government was ordering me to school, and because of the government's laws around where I had to go to school, holding me in a chair in a classroom. And when we challenged, could we move, could we do something, the answer was no, and that I should be grateful for the situation that I was in. I emerged from that situation using my fists. Some might argue I never quit swinging. And I, too, could preach about coming from a background where parents didn't go to college. And I went all the way to graduate from our flagship institution with a PhD, so I appreciate public education and what it did for me. But I, as an 8-year-old child, really would have appreciated an opportunity to be somewhere else. In that moment, no matter of philosophical debate, the arguments of affluent people on how much I should appreciate that scenario didn't matter to that 8-year-old kid going home with a bloody nose. It didn't matter. And you know what? I was able to emerge from that situation not bitter about public schools. All 4 of my children are in public education. 1 of them graduated public education, and I am grateful for the public school systems that I have in Southeast Tennessee that my children were able to enjoy. I'm grateful for those systems because they provided a different atmosphere and environment. And I'm grateful for those public school systems who, within the confines of our current law, have allowed parents to utilize some measures of school choice. This bill ultimately allows us to expand that to give parents even more control over that option. So as all these assumptions are made about who we're influenced by and who we're directed by and who we're pressured by, I'm pressured by a memory of an 8-year-old child. That's who I answer to. Nobody polled that kid, and that kid lives today. That little girl lives today. That child exists today, and they're in your school districts. And they're held captive for the money they bring to that particular school. Not only are we liberating that child from that particular situation, this bill actually goes one step further. It liberates public schools from having to worry whether that child's in the seat. The hold harmless provision sets a floor, a historical move for any state in this nation, a historical commitment to public education. We have the opportunity to do for both win-win situations here. But you want to know who pressures me now? It's the memory of an 8-year-old child who didn't care about all the philosophical arguments. Now, we have polled it, and we have listened, and we have resolutions from school boards. And I will admit, as I read the resolutions from a few of my school boards, I just heard that administrator in my elementary school say once again how much I should love my captivity. Even in this building, I hear it again. I owe that 8-year-old kid a debt of gratitude, and I owe him the chance to stand here in the Tennessee legislature and say, this isn't about politics, this isn't about any of that. It's about whether or not a kid can be where they are safe, where they feel like they can grow, and where they feel like they can learn. And no one is better suited to ascertain that environment than a parent. There's an argument over whether or not this is going to actually go to those kids. Well, if 35% goes to those kids, I'm not willing to hold those 35% of children captive just because I'm worried that some well-to-do family might actually get to use a thing. I'm not willing to burn them at the altar of the status quo just because I've got a bone to pick with whether or not wealth is equitable in this country. I'm not willing to do it. So I stand before you today in support of the bill. It's been said here, there's a lot of work to do. It's not a perfect bill, but I'm telling you it's a step in the right direction. And 35 years ago in my school system, I would have loved for a legislator to have stood on the floor that managed that school system and oversaw that system and voted yes to a bill like this today. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Lowe. Senator Campbell.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I spent a lot of time studying this issue as well, and we've talked a lot about the finances of it, and we've talked a lot about the logistics of it. So I'd just like to address the outcomes versus the ideology. This legislation is an assault on the American dream, and it looks like it's probably going to pass today, but it's a broad and devastating blow in the culture war on truth and science and education. And it's been marketed as a program about choice, but in reality, it's about control. Certainly about control over taxpayer dollars. That goes without saying. It'll be funneled into private organizations. But even more concerning is that we can see clearly with the executive order signed last night by Trump that this is about indoctrination. It's about forcing ideology on our children through an order that demands patriotic education, and it is signed in conjunction with an order that requires agencies to expand access to private school scholarships. We live in a society with vastly disparate outcomes, and this has been rationalized by an emphasis on the equality of opportunity. When we target public education, it is an assault on the bedrock values that have produced the American dream, that put us on the moon, invented personal computers, created the world's most powerful and successful businesses, cured countless illnesses. We may not all be millionaires in this country, but we all have the opportunity to an education that will enable us to pursue anything. And this is why this is a scam. Because the promise that is being made sounds and looks like the aspirational values of freedom we uphold in our country. It's packaged as a paradise of choice and opportunity, but we know from the data that it is really a subsidy for people who already send their kids to private schools. There are lots of sweeteners in this bill right now, and they certainly won't last. But keep in mind that if 35% goes to kids in need, that's 65% that's being taken away from kids in need. And the few that will be able to afford it, to add thousands of dollars needed to actually use the scholarships, will find that their choices are limited to newly built subprime pop-up schools, which the data shows have horrible outcomes. This is why researchers are equating this scheme to predatory lending. Clearly, we are passing legislation to catalyze ideological indoctrination. And here is the thing. When we order ideological education, we are undermining our religious freedom. When we order patriotic education, we are undermining critical thinking. These are the policies of dictators. This is what we see in North Korea, Afghanistan, and Iran, where women are not even allowed an education and are killed for speaking their minds. And this is not a crazy, alarmist, libtard concern. It is not, because we are seeing Christian nationalist groups like Contamunda in Gainsborough and the Highland Rim Project who have moved to Tennessee because of policies like this, who claim alliance with this Project 2025 agenda and who have stated that women should not be educated. They have said that women should not be educated. At the core of this bill is the drive to dumb down the electorate, to marginalize those who are not male, Christian, and white, and to control the population. And I know that Tennesseans don't want this. Most of them have no idea this is even happening. Most of them have reached out, or the people that have reached out to us, I have not had one single person reach out to me in my office and say that they are for this. I've had a lot of emails, group emails, but not one single phone call. 55 counties, dozens of organizations across the state have sent in letters of opposition, resolutions, and pleas not to pass this. But this legislation was intentionally rushed through this body with no regard for the Republican process. And I mean by that, I mean the true Republican process. And that is a state in which supreme power is held by the people and their elected representatives, and which has a president whose powers are constrained by the Constitution rather than a monarch or a dictator. And I'll just close by saying that there is nothing conservative about rushing through this plan to create the largest entitlement program in the history of our state, to spend billions of taxpayer dollars on privatization schemes. Tennesseans do not want this, and I will be voting against it. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Campbell. I have Senator Roberts, Senator Yarborough, and Senator Bailey. Senator Roberts.
Mr. Speaker, I'm just left speechless by the comments from my colleague from Davidson, so I believe I'm just going to pass. Thank you.
Senator Roberts passes. Senator Yarborough.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, members. The provision of education is, if you ask most people in the state, the way we educate our students is the most important thing that state government does. I don't just think that as a senator, I think it as a citizen. I can say from personal experience that it was the public schools and public school teachers in Dyersburg, Tennessee, that changed the trajectory of my life, that allowed me to do everything that I have done since. And as a parent with 2 kids in school, it's the most important thing to me every day. And frankly, regardless of which side any member has spoken from today, they've all spoken about how much education matters to them. So let's talk about this bill. This bill is spending hundreds of millions of dollars, and all available evidence that exist demonstrates that spending this money will actually do damage to education in our state, Mr. Speaker. So really, there are 2 programs. Let's talk about the fact that there are 2 different programs here. The first, most of this money, what the fiscal analysis says estimates at 65% of these dollars, is going to go to existing private school students. That will not change any education outcome in our state, Mr. Speaker. That will be the same students going to the same schools next year. That has no education impact whatsoever. That is sheer economic redistribution. That's all it is. There are lots of students and families in my district, in Williamson County, that attend private schools, one of the few counties where there are actually a mass of private schools. And so we're going to take money from all over the state, from every income bracket, and we're going to send that money to wealthy families, largely in urban and suburban areas, to subsidize decisions that they're already making and not improve one kid's education. We're just transferring wealth, pure and simple. Somehow, that's not the worst part of the bill. Because the minority portion of this is actually an experiment, frankly. We think by creating these new vouchers, we're going to create an incentive for there to be new private schools that open up. But here's what we know. We know that will lead to worse education outcomes. We've seen it in our pilot program already. We've seen it in every single state that has adopted this program. A lot of places, schools will open up for a couple of years, take the voucher money, and then the students come right back into the public schools, who then have to remediate them, which is just more money for us. We also know there's no accountability here. This legislature has insisted rigorously and constantly, sometimes to our detriment, on having rigorous testing where we can see how students are doing, where we can see how schools are doing, where we can see if there's a return on our investment. And we have decided not to impose that accountability here. We know there are no standards. Everybody in this legislature has stood up and supported things like this, like the standards that we have for civic education, for teaching Tennessee or U.S. history. These schools don't have to do any of that. We also know that there's no actual choice. The average private school tuition in Tennessee is far more than $7,000, and I think we all know that. We're not creating spots. At best, we are not doing student choice. We're giving schools choice about whether they want to take more students. We also know, and we know that this is true. We know that this will lead to less funding for public schools. How do we know it? Because it says it in black and white. It says it in black and white in the fiscal analysis of the bill. It's been claimed on this floor, Mr. Speaker, that the governor heard our concerns and fixed this problem. That's not true. The fiscal note for this bill says that there will be less money for public schools in next year's budget. Less money will be allocated under TISA. Tens of millions of dollars less. We know that there's going to be a loss of effectively $200 million in the funding. And the hold harmless provision, I mean, this is one of the most bogus uses of language we've ever had. Hold harmless, we're going to compensate all the schools about $3 million for about a $200 million loss. I don't know what hold harmless means where y'all come from, but Mr. Speaker, that is not holding our public schools harmless. It's just not. And we know that this isn't fiscally responsible. We are creating a brand new, open-ended entitlement that is technically available to every family in the state of Tennessee that has school-age children, right? And we're deciding whether we're going to do that based on the cost for the first 2 years. Now, the leader and the sponsor of this legislation said, oh, well, that's still fiscally responsible because the growth of this program is subject to appropriation. Well, if your counties, if any of the counties in our districts said they were going to open a new school next year because they had enough money to fund the kindergarten and they would open first and second grade subject to appropriation, we would say that's crazy. Because you don't make big deal decisions in government without thinking about what they're going to look like 5 and 10 years out. But what we're doing here, we're just launching a new separately funded school system and hoping for the best, knowing that we're going to have to come back here year after year and decide whether to grow this thing and how it's going to work and how we're going to fund two systems at the same time. For doing this, what we could do, we could fund $7,000 vouchers for every 3-year-old and 4-year-old to go to pre-K or child care. The same number of students that would be adding to the budget here. Identical. Now, that would be actually a really good program. I would love to be for a program like that. But I wouldn't be, Mr. Speaker, sadly, because it's not fiscally responsible to do it. We actually don't have the resources to do it. And we don't know if we have the resources to do it even this year. We're deciding this in a special session before we've even seen next year's budget. This legislature has never thought about doing something this irresponsible. And the evidence here, we are stewards of the public trust, the public dollars, and we are spending money that at worst, or at best, we are spending money that at best leads to just subsidizing what people are already doing, and at worst blows a hole in our budget, undermines public school funding, and leads to worse outcomes for kids. Why would we do that? Now, I don't doubt that there are members in this room who believe firmly that this is the right thing to do, and I would never ask them to do anything counter to their conscience. But this is a moment, the rare moment, Mr. Speaker, when every person in this chamber could be the deciding vote on something that really matters to the future of the state. Every single one of us could be the deciding vote on whether we go down this path or not. And all I ask, Mr. Speaker, is that when people are making that decision, they think about why they ran for office in the first place. What they thought they would ever do if all the responsibility was on them to chart the future of the state. And whether they think that this is genuinely the right thing to do for their community, for the kids in their community, for the schools in their community, for the future of the students of the state, and the future of all of us in the state. And I just ask that people vote and do the right thing. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Yarborough. Senator Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Bailey.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I think there's a couple of members that may want to say something. I'm going to yield and ask to come back to me.
Okay, without objection, we'll do that. Senator Gardenhire.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been for vouchers since 1970 when I was on the National Board of Young Americans for Freedom. I started to go to my sister's farm up in Sale Creek, Tennessee, which is in Central Watson's district. It's a very rural area. That's where we store a lot of things from our past that we can't get rid of or don't want to turn loose of. And I've even got one of the original bumper stickers from 1970s that I'm for vouchers. It's in a filing cabinet up in this old trailer that's up there on their farm. And I went up there and she says, you can't go in that trailer. And I said, why not? She said, it's full of snakes. And I said, why don't you set up a tent and we'll have a revival, they'll all come out and I'll go in and get it. Well, we didn't do it and I couldn't get the bumper stickers, but I've been there. I voted for the ESA program and we added Hamilton County several years later. But let me explain why we excluded Hamilton County, because Hamilton County has been mentioned several times. They had 5 failing schools. Remember that number, 5. We had a brand new superintendent who was really good and really smart. He had PhDs in every kind of imagination you could think of. And he said, please give me a chance to turn this around. He said, I can do it. And we met for about an hour and a half, and he went through his plan to do it. I took a picture of it. The next day, drove up to Governor Haslam and had Candace McQueen in the room. And I said, please don't take over our school. The state was going to take over those 5 schools. Remember the number 5 now. Don't forget 5. And Governor Haslam said, okay, we'll give him a chance. We will not take it over. We'll give him the resources that he needs to fix those 5 schools. About 8 years later,
over $20 million extra, plus 3 full-time employees from the state that went down and lived and worked in Chattanooga in our schools. We went from 5 to 9. Now, this is not baseball where the highest score wins. It should be golf where the lowest score wins. Now, going from 5 to 9 is not progress. And so we came back and we added Hamilton County to the ESA program. Now, I've visited some schools, small private schools and larger private schools that are taking advantage of the ESA program. And some of those kids came out of failing schools that they were so damaged, the children, from being in those schools. It's going to take time for them to overcome that damage that they received in those failing schools. And therefore, when people say, well, it's only been going for 2 years or a year and a half, and they don't measure up to everybody else, well, of course they don't. They didn't have a chance to overcome the problems that they got while they were in those particular schools. Now, I went to public schools. I went to more public schools than anybody in this room. And it wasn't by choice either. I got kicked out and failed and everything else, but I went to a lot of them. I ended up at Chattanooga High School. We had more National Merit Scholars in my class than Baylor, Macaulay, and GPS combined. Now, I wasn't one of them, but we had them in our class. I met with Governor Lee back in August of 2023 in my district office in Chattanooga. And I told him then that I was for the concept of school choice. But, as you've heard this phrase before, the devil was in the details. I supported the Senate bill that came out of the Senate Education Committee last year. I met with Governor Lee 8 days ago, and I told him I was a no vote on this bill as it was at the time. He asked me why. By the way, he was very gracious and very understanding. And I gave him my reasons. I also told him I did not vote for concepts, only on actual bills. He told me he had a fix for one of my main exceptions. And there was. My exception was taken care in the budget amendment. He disagreed with me on my main objection. However, I told him I had a fix, and I mentioned to him, although he did not comment, I will be running a bill this year to attempt to take care of my objections and hope this body and the House will approve. Last night, and again this morning in bill review, Chairman Watson answered the majority of my concerns with the Finance Committee's amendments. My background has been in business, and I am and will always look out for the decisions in a business sense and what is good for the citizens of the district that I represent. As most of you know and observed this week, if I believe in something, I'm not afraid to take a stand and stand my ground. Up until this morning, I was been a no vote, but the majority of my concerns and objections have been removed. I know I've told several people I respect that I was a no vote, and to them I apologize if you think I misled them, but it was not on purpose. I will be voting for this bill. I yield to Senator Baker.
Thank you, Senator Gardner. I have Senator Stevens. Senator Stevens.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to briefly just highlight one aspect of this legislation that hasn't been highlighted and is important to me, but it's also, I think, important to a number of people across the state. I guess we've lost our resident historian in the Senate, so I always like to put a little bit of perspective on things. But the first common schools in Massachusetts were founded, public school they called it, or common school back then, but they were founded in order to enable children to read and understand the religious text, but also to the laws of the nation. I mean, we're a nation of self-governance, meaning we're going to have to either be governing ourselves or we'll be governed from external sources. And so our founders were really strong in believing that not just in education for education's sake, but they believed in education for civil government's sake or civil order. And so, morality was part of that. In order to have that self-government, morality is an important part of that. The Northwest Ordinance, religion, morality, and knowledge being necessary to good government and the happiness of mankind, schools and the means of education shall forever be encouraged. On and on and on. I believe the purpose of education is to foster a virtuous citizenry capable of self-government. So what this bill does is it opens a door for people who may not be able to afford an explicit religious education in line with their children's values constitutionally. 2002, Zellman versus Simmons Harris, 122 Supreme Court, where a government aid program is neutral with respect to religion and provides assistance directly to a broad class of citizens who, in turn, direct government aid to religious schools wholly as a result of their own genuine and independent private choice, the program is not readily subject to challenge under the Establishment Clause. So parents who can't afford to homeschool, they have to work. Parents who can't afford a private school, this is an opportunity for them to send their children to a school that's in line with their own values. It's the only way to do it, constitutionally. And so for those parents, I'm glad to stand up here and just give them this opportunity where they can go to a school that's in line with their values. And there are things that can be responded to by teachers in public schools. But I've known plenty of teachers in my Sunday school class, friends with, they regret that children aren't always given the chance to hear the full story. They have to shade it for fear of, not understanding it. So, for example, well, I won't get into that. But, Mr. Speaker, I just wanted to highlight this is a historic day for the state because it is a statewide opportunity for parents across the state who want to choose a different educational setting. I'm not making a normative decision on what's better or what's different. I'm just saying it's a better choice for that parent. And if we can support parents who want that opportunity for their children, I'm glad to do so. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Senator Stevens. I have Senator Bailey. Senator Bailey yields to Senator Crow. Senator Crow.
Mr. Chair, just very briefly, I just feel the need to really follow up on what Senator Stevens said, really just boil down what he said was, it was said on this floor earlier that this bill is for the rich. It's actually the opposite, exactly what he's saying. This bill, for the first time statewide, gives low-income parents that choice. It does the opposite. It's not for the rich.
Thank you, Senator Crow. Senator Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Members, I just need to respond. The Finance Committee has the responsibility of being guardians of the Treasury of this state, and I just need to reassure my colleagues that contrary to what has been spoken on this floor by the opposition, we have analyzed the financials of this piece of legislation thoroughly and feel confident that it does not place an undue burden on our state's treasury and that it will create opportunity for families all across this state without creating financial hardship. And as I said earlier, Mr. Speaker, I laid upon the members' desks a simplistic outline of where all the money for this comes. And actually, the Freedom Scholarships members, you will remember, we appropriated that money last year, or in the budget that we're in now. It's been waiting for this, so that's not any new dollars. The gaming revenue that is used is not part of the scholarships. The gaming revenue is for capital projects. We have put in safeguards to protect the lottery, to be sure that the lottery is first made whole before any resources are available for capital. The funding floor will come from future tax revenues of the state, but it's a very small number. It's $5 million in terms of the total budget. The teacher bonuses, many members on finance will recognize that this is one-time money, which we are drawing from reversions in this year's budget of money that has been unspent. So in essence, it is money that has already been appropriated by the state and already provided for in the budget. The $17 million for grants will be from future revenues, but again, in the grand total of a budget that grows at somewhere between $300 and $400 million a year, $17 million to reward high-performing school systems doesn't seem to be an unreasonable amount, and quite frankly, has been a discussion on this Senate floor for a number of years from a number of different members. And then, of course, the $6.2 million, which we discussed earlier during the appropriations bill, is there to help fix a funding issue that has existed and exists in Sevier County. So, Mr. Speaker, members, this bill is not perfect. No legislation is, but this bill creates, and this is really important for you members who may be struggling, you support school choice, but you're trying to decide if this is the right bill. Think of this. This bill creates a framework of school choice that we and future legislatures can refine and improve upon. But we may never have that opportunity if we do not act today. If you are here and you support school choice and you are waiting for the perfect bill, you will spend your entire legislative career waiting for the perfect bill because they do not exist. The opportunity to advance school choice in Tennessee is supported by the majority of Tennesseans, and it may not exist in the future if we do not act today. Today. Not in the next legislative session or not with the next governor, but we need to act today. If you support school choice, again, as most of the majority of Tennesseans do, if you believe that parents and families should have a say in their children's education choices, which has been argued on this floor today, if you align with the current presidential administration and their views towards school choice, even today as the president has announced the expansion of federal funding for states which have involved themselves in the school choice movement, if you believe in the business argument that competition makes everybody better, then I say to you, you must support this bill. Even if you have concerns about it, it gets the school choice option before us, and it gives us something to work with and improve upon. So I say, Mr. Speaker, if not now with this body, when? Today's the day. I encourage members that support school choice, that support parental choice, that support family choice, that support education choice. And quite frankly, I'm a little bit taken that everybody believes that anybody that is in private education is wealthy. If that's what you believe, then you haven't been to very many private schools. Because in private schools, you will find families who work 2 or 3 jobs. You will find children of public school teachers who are working in public schools and another job so they can send their children to private school. And you would deny them the opportunity because you believe that everybody in a private school is wealthy? The 65%, I don't know what of that 65% is wealthy, but I will tell you, I believe that the majority of that 65% are hardworking, middle-class Tennesseans trying to create the best opportunity for their children that they can. And if this body can help advance that cause for those parents and those children, then, Mr. Speaker, we need to move forward. So to my members who may be struggling, are for school choice, don't know about this bill, I say act today and let's work hard together to make this the best school choice state in the United States of America. With that, I yield to Senator Bailey.
Senator Bailey, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I certainly appreciate my colleague from Hamilton County taking my speech and delivering it to this body. With that, I move previous question.
That's a proper motion, properly seconded. Is there objection to the previous question? I see none. Previous questions called for. Leader Johnson, you're recognized to close on House Bill 6004.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I've been up here for a while. I have to say this has been one of the best debates I've ever heard on this Senate floor. And I thank everyone for chiming in on all sides of this issue. You know, we're going to be up here in just about a week and a half. We're going to get back to work. And, you know, one of the busiest committees we have in this Senate is our Education Committee. And you want to know why? It's because we care passionately about education in our state. We may have differing opinions about how it should run, but we all want our kids to get the best possible education that they can get. So while we continue to work on that, let's do, as I said earlier, let's recognize no matter how hard we work to make our public education system the best it can be, it is incapable of meeting the needs of every single child in our state. So let's empower parents of children who are not being served by the public school they're zoned for. Let's empower them with a different option. Let's let them use their tax dollars to pick a different option that's a better fit for their child. That's as simple as I can make it. That's what this bill does. This bill empowers parents in the state of Tennessee so they can do what's best for their child. Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I renew my motion.
Thank you, Senator Johnson. Parliamentary situation. Senator Johnson's moved. House Bill 6004 as amended. It's been properly seconded. If you favor concurrence with House Bill 6004 on third and final consideration, you'll vote aye when the bell rings. If you do not, vote no. Mr. Clerk, take the vote.
Ayes 20, nays 13.
House Bill 6004 having received a constitutional majority, I declare it passed. Without objection, the motion reconsider is hereby tabled. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that concludes the calendar. Reports from committees.
Reports from committees. I see none. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Statements and announcements.
Statements and announcements. Chairman White.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The Education Committee would like to thank Colleen Ellis for all her time, hard work, and dedication to the Education Committee. She is moving on to THEC. We're going to miss her greatly. The Education Committee will not be the same without her, but we just want to thank her for all of her time and effort and energy she's put into making education the best possible thing in Tennessee. So thank you to Colleen, and we wish her all the very, very best.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you, Chairman White. Next order. I'm sorry. Chairman Watson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. If I might have the body's attention just for a moment. I know I've talked a lot this past day, but I do want to take a moment, and I'm looking over at our Chair of Education. In all of the conversation around school choice and around the special session, I did not want it to be lost on this body of the most current NAEP reports on educational performance in Tennessee. I believe, and the chairman may correct me, but I believe for the first time, Tennessee actually is outperforming the national average when it comes to reading and math in 4th and 8th grade levels. Now, to some of our newer members, this might not mean as much to you as some of us who have been in this educational slog for the past 10 or 15 years. And I would just say, Mr. Speaker, that all of the reforms that we have been criticized for by the opposition over the years are now beginning to bear fruit, because many of the students who are now starting to experience those education reforms are starting to show the results of those education reforms. Whether it's in math or whether it's in literacy, we are beginning to see the fruits of our labor. Now, the credit for that doesn't go to the policymakers here in the Senate. The credit goes to those in the Department of Education and at our local education boards of education, as well as each classroom teacher and each school principal who have been implementing and executing those reforms. But those ideas, Mr. Speaker, were birthed in this body. And so we should not forget how much progress we have made and how much progress we still have to make. With that, I yield back, Mr. Speaker.
Thank you, Chairman Watson. Chairman White, your name was called. Thank you for the great job you've done.
Thank you so much. And this is wonderful, wonderful news for the state of Tennessee. And thank all the chairmen before me that has made this truly possible.
Thank you. Next order, Mr. Clerk.
Mr. Speaker, that concludes the regular order of business for the day.
Leader Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Make sure I'm on the right spot. Please, I'd ask you, sir, that you have the clerk notify the governor and the House of Representatives that the Senate has concluded its business.
Without objection, the clerk please notify the governor and the House of Representatives that the Senate has completed its business. Leader Johnson, you're recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move the Senate Journal of the proceedings from the first extraordinary day through the fourth extraordinary day of the first extraordinary session of the 114th General Assembly be approved.
Without objection, they're approved. Leader Johnson.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Pursuant to Senate Joint Resolution 6005, I move the Senate adjourn sine die the first extraordinary session of the 114th General Assembly.
The motion is to adjourn sine die. All those favoring the motion will say aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it. Pursuant to Article 3, Section 9 of the